I'll start this off by giving this a trigger warning. The story has gun violence, death, and some of the aftermath. I understand if that's really upsetting to some. All of the names in this story have been changed to keep the privacy of the people involved. Back when I was a sophomore in high school, I went to a relatively infamous high school. Most people in the area saw it as a place full of violence, drugs, and poverty. Some organizations even prevented students who had long since graduated from attending their events or classes because they didn't want to be associated with it. I often saw fights, and I knew some of the students carried drugs. My ex at the time had even threatened to kill me a few times during the year with an imaginary finger gun to the head. Thinking back on it now, that really haunts me. It was all too close to a reality that had yet to unfold. Yet, even with all that in mind, I never really felt that unsafe. It was just how the school was and had always been. That was until the end of the year. It was during finals and we were all busy worrying about grades and GPAs. I came to class early and I sat in my seat next to my friend. We talked about whatever was interesting at the moment other than finals. The project I was working on, the boy she kissed, and some benign drama about a couple that we knew. You know, normal teen stuff. Usually every morning we'd have the bell chime. We wouldn't even have any morning announcements until the next period, so that class would begin almost right away. Just as we were getting to the juicy bit, we were then interrupted by an announcement. 3 chimes followed by,
"This is a lockdown. This is not a drill. There's an active shooter in the building. Teachers, please lock your doors and shelter immediately."
I felt an emotional gut punch right to my stomach. There was a rush of students and chaos in the hallways as people pushed into our classroom that I hadn't ever had class with before. Once the room was to full capacity, the teacher locked the door and I then slammed it shut. I sat there frozen in my chair with a clear view to the now eerily empty hallway. What was I supposed to do again? We had gone over this over the year and yet I couldn't even remember. Mr. Valdez scolded us for not moving out of our seats in clear view of a potential shooter. So we moved to the other side of the room and onto the cold hard carpet. I can still feel the fibers under my hands as I remember this. What the hell? A student randomly yelled from within our room. "Shut the fuck up!" A wave of a stage whispered back, including the teacher. The room went quiet after this rush of anxiety as students stared pale face down at their phones in hopes to know what was going on and where the hell the shooter was. The entire school was dead silent. If anyone had made a sound, it could be heard on the other side of the building. Without warning, I heard 3 distinct shots. At the time, I didn't register what they were nor how much they meant at the moment. How it had extinguished someone's life in a blink. I'm pretty sure Mr. Valdez knew exactly what had happened, and he was trying to distract us while we were all hunkered down. "Oh, I forgot my coffee. Damn it." He said this with a cheeky grin as he crawled across the floor to retrieve his cup from his desk. He grabbed it as he then proceeded to look out the slats in the blinds to see if he could make out anyone or anything outside of our room. No one. Did they forget us? Someone asked. There was no answer. Nobody was confident enough to answer. He climbed back over to his hiding spot and sipped at his coffee in a silly manner. I owe him a lot for being so comforting in such a scary time. "Mr. Reed is dead," a student said. "Someone said he got shot." "We can't know that for sure." Mr. Valdez made sure to correct them. "I feel sick even now. Mr. Reed was my health teacher. I had just talked to him the day before. He couldn't actually be dead, right? Right?" I felt my body begin to shake after the initial numbness had finally worn off. I put my head into my knees and closed my eyes and just prayed to whoever and whatever I could. "Can we just go?" The same student from earlier then said. "Literally, just shut the hell up." "Why?" "There's a shooter out there, you dumbass." I could then hear a helicopter flying over the school, followed by what sounded like thousands of distant sirens. This was real. How was this real? I wanted to call my mom on my ancient flip phone and cry and tell her that I was still alive, but I was afraid that would change. Plus, the teachers had always told us not to jam the cell towers in an emergency like this. So I just sat there silently with tears gathering in my eyes. Suddenly, there was a huge bang. I grimaced thinking it was something bad, really bad. Law enforcement in heavy armor kicked through the door at the end of the hall, and I think the beginning of it too. I saw an excited police dog being held back past our door, followed by someone then yelling, "Drop it!" Oh my God, the shooter was in our hallway? "Drop it, now!" I heard again in an even louder and commanding voice. Instead of hearing some more yelling or something worse, I heard a metallic clang, a sound I still don't even understand now. Who was dumb enough to be in the hallway? I heard more yelling from another part of the building. "Miss Buchanan, open your door!" Followed by silence. "Open your door now!" What the hell was going on? I then heard multiple people walking at a fast pace down the hallway and then disappear. Had they moved an entire class? The building went silent again. My heart dropped. Did they not even get the shooter yet? I could hear students crying in the next room over. The feeling was mutual. It felt like hours had gone by, yet it had only been 30 minutes. Before I could get more upset, a sheriff was at our door with his AR-15. He unlocked it and opened the door and then commanded us all to get up. "Leave your belongings. Come out with your hands up." My entire class got up, and we did as we were told. I, out of complete stupidity, had grabbed my backpack. I'm really thankful that he didn't tackle me right there. We were escorted in a line out of the school with our hands up. When we reached the commons, there were multiple officer checkpoints set up watching us with trained guns. I'll never forget the fear that was in the air. "We have snipers on you. If you make any sudden movements, we will disable you." I felt like I was going to throw up. I'm really surprised I didn't. It would have probably made things worse anyway. When we exited the building, I was greeted with more law enforcement, firefighters, and medical personnel than I'd ever seen in my entire life. The parking lot was jam-packed with them. We were stopped and commanded to form several lines before we could cross the street and off campus. The officer put my backpack in a pile with the others and then began to pat me down. He stopped around my left pocket and then looked at me with a serious glare. "Ma'am, what is this?" "Lip gloss, sir." He then moved to my other pocket. "And this?" "That's my cell phone, sir." He then nodded at me and he told me to walk across the street. By this point, I was then instructed to have my arms behind my head. "As soon as you pass through this checkpoint, you're no longer under arrest," he told me. I felt relief to some weird degree, but the rest of my body still felt like it was buzzing. I kept looking back across the street to the lines of students waiting to be discharged with us. The school didn't even look the same anymore. I remember the moment I was free, I had then called my mom. I didn't cry like I thought I would, though.
"Hey, Mom, I'm alive."
Those words were strange. She told me that both her and my dad were waiting for me at the evacuation spot at the local grocery store. I was surprised my parents had gotten off work to get me. Something about that was just wild to me. I mean, that whole thing at the school hadn't really just happened, right? By the time I was waiting for my ride to the evac spot, I was greeted with the most horrific thing that I'd ever heard in my life. "Ma'am, you aren't supposed to." "Where's my son? Where's Flynn? Please tell me he's okay." "Ma'am, he..." Then I heard the sound of a mother who had just lost her child. Her loud cries forever seared into my mind. It's hard to really explain the weight you get blasted with when you hear it. That day we lost 2 people, and only 1 was injured. I'm so glad that it wasn't more. And the most chilling detail? The shooter had brought enough ammo to take out almost the entire school if they hadn't been stopped. And no, before you ask, it wasn't my ex. He had dropped out of school and moved way before this had happened. If you're ever in this situation, and I hope to God you never are, please make sure to stay out of the view of whatever the danger is and be smart. It could literally save your life. And for anyone wondering about the shooter, I really don't want to tell too much, as it could literally give away everyone's identities. But please, everyone, stay safe. For some context, this happened in 2016, just 2 months before I turned 7. I'm now 14 and in high school. I'm a female from India, but I've lived in Canada since 2019. So growing up, when I had first started kindergarten, the school had about 240 to 250 students, and still does, so it's a small elementary school. We had a lockdown about every month to 2 months. This happened around the end of April 2016, because my 7th birthday was in June. I remember the week before the lockdown had happened, we would go Easter egg hunting in the library. The day of the lockdown was just like any other day, boring and tiring. Then around the end of the day, the principal comes into the intercom and says,
"We're going into lockdown. This is not a drill."
Our teacher hears this and then shuffles us inside with all of our stuff, because our stuff was put in the hallway because there was no room to put it inside. Once we were inside the classroom, our teacher locked the door behind us and then went across the room to shut the blinds. This announcement came on at about 2:25 p.m. and school had ended at 2:30. As our teacher's closing the blinds, she then tells us to go under our desks and to stay quiet. We quickly hide under our desks, lying down on our stomachs with our heads down. I think it's been about an hour before we can finally get out from under our desks. I don't think the intruder has left our school's property, so we have to stay inside for another 2 hours until about 5:30, and then we can finally go home with our parents. I remember my mom telling me that she and all of the other parents were really worried about why we weren't coming outside yet. All of the parents were waiting for about 3 hours, all of them just wondering if their kids were okay or not. I can't really remember if our school was open or not the next day, but it was very traumatizing for me and all of the kids that were in my first grade class, as well as all of the kids in kindergarten. But yeah, that's pretty much it for my story. I graduated from there in 2022, and nothing else has happened there since that incident. So the story took place back when I was in elementary school. I was quite young, as this had to be around 1st to 2nd grade. At the time, I had been moving a lot, so I wasn't at this school for very long. But unfortunately, I did have a very real serious lockdown at the time I was there. It was a typical class day, nothing out of the ordinary for most of the day. My teacher often gave stuff out to the kids for good work, and we also had a treasure box in the room. That day, I'd gotten a huge pink dog stuffed animal, and we were all preparing to go home and cleaning up. I remember cleaning up these small colored shaped blocks made of wood when the lockdown was called. For the layout, there was this big hall in the middle of the classrooms, at least in my area of the classroom was, and that was where we were all taken to. At the time, I didn't really understand the seriousness of the situation because the lockdown was because of someone armed on campus. The teachers were handing out animal crackers to all of the kids, and I happily accepted the snacks while getting to sit on the floor with my new stuffed animal. In this big hallway, there was a door that led outside. You know those frosted windows that are often in bathrooms? It had a window just like that. Probably 5-ish minutes into being in that hallway, you could see a figure in that window. The man outside started banging and screaming, and us being little kids, we had freaked out. But we were told to stay quiet as the teachers continued to try and calm us with the snacks. I was the closest kid to that door. Well, eventually police did show up and they arrested the man. I found out from one of the teachers that the man had been an ex from one of the teachers and he had shown up with a knife to try and find her. At the time, I don't think I really understood how scary that was and just how bad it could have been. But looking back at it, I'm really surprised that I wasn't even that scared. Instead, just staring at the frosted window eating my snack. I've been in a lot of lockdowns from nearby activities, but no other on-campus threats. To start off, I'm a young male teacher at one of the middle schools in my city. I teach 6th grade science. The school that I work at was built in the late 1960s. So a lot of the stuff in the building doesn't make sense or isn't necessarily ideal for the current climate of schools in America. The day the story takes place started off super normal. I had my smallest class first in the morning, and we had maybe 20 or 30 minutes left in the class before they switched to their next class. One of my students asked if he could use the restroom. I told him to fill out a hall pass and he could go ahead and go. This student is on the autism spectrum. He's verbal, but when he gets overwhelmed or overstimulated, he has a really hard time gathering his thoughts and expressing them verbally. After about 30 seconds, he burst through my classroom door and he's on the verge of tears. I was really confused because he was just fine a second ago. He was about to get out the words, "There's a cop with a gun." I don't know why, but my first thought was that he saw our student resource officer in her taser, and then he got scared and came back. As I'm trying to calm him down, a police officer in full SWAT gear holding an assault rifle bursts into the room and then yells at us to go on lockdown. As calmly as possible, I got my students to move to the corner of the room that isn't visible by the door. I then turned off the lights and locked the door. Since I teach science in a classroom, my room is connected to a storage closet that connects to 4 other classrooms and a copy room that connects to the hall. All of these doors lock from the inside of the storage closet. Since my classroom is the closest to the copy room and the door to the hall, it was my responsibility to close and lock the door to the copy room. I told my students to stay where they are quietly while I locked the door. As soon as I opened the door to the science closet, I met with an assault rifle being pointed directly at my head, and I'm then being yelled to get onto the ground. The cops had started to sweep through the closet. I was given a quick pat down, and I told him what I was doing, and I was then just yelled to get back into my room. I don't blame the officer for yelling or any part of his response. I can only imagine the stress and adrenaline that he had looking for a shooter. The worst part is that it was directly in front of my entire class, and I could hear them crying during the entire thing. I went back in my room and shoved a chair in the doorknob as a last-ditch effort just to make sure no one entered the door. I also barricaded the classroom door with my demo table that's on wheels that lock. I then sat with my students for over an hour in the dark with my makeshift weapon in case anyone tried to come in the door. After my room had been on lockdown for at least 5 to 10 minutes, an official lockdown was put into place over the intercom of the school. Eventually, we went into a modified lockdown where students were able to return to their seats, but they couldn't leave the room. I ended up putting on Finding Nemo to distract them from what just went on. Eventually, parents started picking up their kids one by one. In the end, there was never an actual threat to anyone in the school, thankfully. A few students had heard of a rumor about a possible threat, and they took it to the principal, as we had always drilled them to do. Well, the SRO had heard about the students telling the principal, and they called the police, who then came into the building unannounced without an actual lockdown order put into place. While I'm glad no one was physically hurt and there was no threat and action was taken swiftly, it was a complete botch of the situation, as the students and teachers were in the halls when the SWAT team entered the building. They really could have handled that a lot better. But like I said, I'm really glad no one was hurt.